The NWSL is a league of chaos, so I have 4 bold predictions for the postseason. It's not going to go the way you guys think it's going to go, unless it does. Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Wednesday, November 5th, and we are going to be talking NWSL postseason. I am rooting for parity, competition, surprises, and exciting football after a really interesting year where there's one team sitting at the top. But that's not what postseason is about. Postseason is about surprises and upsets. And I'm going to talk through a couple of things that stick out to me as distinct possibilities that might buck some of the national coverage or the national kind of thoughts that we've seen going into this playoff series. I can't wait. It's going to be great. Root for chaos always. Let's dig in. The NWSL regular season is over and the playoffs are here. I'm excited. It was an interesting regular season, I think, if we're all being honest, with one super huge winner in Kansas City, one team handling business readily in Washington, and 12 other teams kind of figuring it out as they go, which, I mean, that's reductive, but I think this season will probably be remembered as one where a few teams kind of had the universe tell them that they needed to get serious. There were a lot of frustrating injuries, the off-field governance feeling a little bit wearisome, but also a whole lot of really good soccer. And I think this moment here, pre-playoffs, is the one to say, you know, the regular season in the NWSL is its own thing and should be appreciated for what it is. But the postseason is also its own monster. And sometimes I think the lens of the reputation perhaps of a season, as you think of, like, you know, the entirety of 2025, is going to be litigated through what happens next. I think winning the Shield is incredibly difficult. I think Kansas City will be remembered as one of the historically good teams in this league. But you just remember who won at the end. And I actually think that's a really beautiful thing about the NWSL setup. I think you just get a little bit of extra juice here at the end, and hopefully anything can happen, which is what I'm telling myself. Despite having a great affection for Kansas City, you know, they dominate. We're playing an incredibly fun style of football. And if they did go all the way in November and pulled off the double and we had double winners back to back, I don't think any neutral viewer would be all that upset, because the way they do it is really fun. And they are so solid in the defense, the attack, all the different levels of the way they play football. But I refuse to brush off the playoffs as an inevitability. I'm not going to do it. I want to let them play the playoffs, and then maybe later we'll say it was inevitability, because the NWSL is nothing if not a chaos agent. I had a lot of fun watching Decision Day, despite only one seed being determined in that final weekend, and I'm ready to believe. I'm ready to believe that anything can truly happen between those 4 lines on the right day in the NWSL. So my playoff preview is not going to be kind of, you know, going long on why Kansas City is so dominant. I want to advocate for some chaos. So I've come up with 4 points, one for each match this weekend, that I think at least a few could possibly end up as the headlines once this round is complete. Despite probably, if I was going with my gut, I would say Kansas City is still the team to beat and probably the team that everyone expects to be holding the trophy at the end of November. However, let's start with our biggest one. For number 1, bold NWSL playoff prediction. And I mean it. I mean all 4 of these. I think Gotham absolutely could knock the Current out of the playoffs in the first round. I believe that. They messed up their final weekend, Gotham did, of the regular season, and they fell to number 8, which is not what they were hoping for. I mean, they went into Decision Day being able to finish as high as number 4, host a playoff game. They fall all the way to the bottom of the playoff field at number 8, and now they're traveling to Kansas City for their quarterfinal. There's no kind of sugarcoating this one. This is bad news for the Bats. The Current haven't lost a regular season game at home this year. They were far away the best team in the league by a mile. They've been rotating minutes pretty much since they clinched the Shield a number of weeks ago. They've been working a really smart, sophisticated rest system that should have them ready for the long haul. Kansas City's in a good position despite some of the injuries they're carrying. But let's also be honest, this is probably not the matchup that Kansas City was hoping for either, especially after clinching the top seed so long ago. Rightful MVP frontrunner Temwa Chawinga doesn't seem particularly close to returning to the field after having to leave Kansas City's match against Houston a few weeks ago. I'm not expecting her to play in this game this weekend. Would love to see it, but I just don't think that's the messaging we're getting out of Kansas City. Adductor strains don't just heal up that quickly, and they need to take that very, very seriously after what happened to Barbara Banda mid-season. And Gotham's skid on Decision Day was a product closer to a management issue rather than anything inherent to how well the team can play. Though ain't that been the story for Gotham overall this whole season, right? They rested too many players, to put it bluntly, on decision day, opting to save some defenders for the real thing this weekend rather than pushing for better seeding when they had the chance. They also were relying on some U.S. players that had very active international period with the U.S. just prior, like Jaden Shaw, Rose Lavelle. They had to handle a really quick turnaround. And Gotham didn't get the balance right, and that's been a problem for them all season. They started really slow, and I think they were pretty disheartened after losing to the Courage. It ended up being 3-2, but the start was pretty poor. They were down by a lot of goals at the half, and I think that felt like to them, well, we are in danger of putting ourselves in a playoff hole rather than feeling like they are going to be competitive in their playoff game. But in all of that, I think there's room for, in one brilliant moment, the real Gotham to eventually show up. If Lavelle, Shaw, Real come in with the right focus and a normal week of rest, if they get that balance right with the starting 11, if they're able to execute their game plan, which is not really that crazy, it's just a lot of pressing from the top, being able to move the ball quickly on the wings and score goals, I think they have this history of building a little magic in the postseason. The reason why this probably won't happen is Kansas City's defense is too good. Vlatko is a defensive wizard, as we know. And the Currents successfully ran their come from behind drill against San Diego on decision day when they went down a goal and came back without Chawinga. But you wonder if they face a little bit of adversity early, if they have trouble getting their momentum back, if there is a way for Gotham to show up in a real way. Maybe there's a little bit more competition to this one than we think. Maybe this doesn't have to be, the game of death for Gotham. That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for Gotham to come in, show off their star power. I don't think they necessarily get the win, but I think that they could. And I like that makes this 1 versus 8 still very compelling. So we're holding out hope for number 1 versus number 8 for a good game, leading us to number 2, which I'm a little less maybe bullish on. I think number 2, that Seattle Reign's Chat GPT ball could send the Orlando Pride home. Necessary backstory on this one. Maybe you've heard this story, maybe you haven't. If you listen to this show, maybe as its own backstory, the Seattle Reign drive me nuts, and they have all year. They play hyper conservative, this back five. They don't generate a lot of attack. They like to sit back and maybe force the other team to lose as much as they try to win themselves. And after last week, I genuinely was like, I'm being pranked here. I'm being pranked. When manager Laura Harvey, who I want to give her due props, is a multiple times over Shield winning coach. Laura Harvey is a good coach. Admitted on the Soccerish podcast that the team's new patented back five system, which I've opined so many times on this show, came from a prompt from Chat GPT before the season began. It was not really a tactic that she had considered too much before kind of trying some stuff out, using that as a tool. I'm not going to wade too far into the implications of that statement. But again, that did feel specifically like a little bit of a cruel joke to me, a person who likes free-flowing attacking-based soccer and who must respect but not necessarily enjoy watching the Reign's hyper-conservative playing style this season. Though I have to admit, it's worked for them. They were in the middle of the playoff table. They certainly did better this year than they did last year. I don't know, revealing the impetus of the AI tool maybe just really sets me back to, I find the five back unappealing. I find the way the Reign approach winning games to be very zero sum rather than something that people might enjoy watching week in and week out. But that has to be fine because it's gotten them where they wanted to go, which is a quarterfinal against Orlando. And the even more messed up thing for my poor entertainment loving heart is I think it could totally work. I think the five back could totally work to knock reigning champion Orlando out of the playoffs. If you've been following along week to week, the Pride have been pretty inconsistent this year. They're less possession based. They have fewer weapons to break down that kind of conservative approach. As everyone knows, they lost Barbara Banda as their most dynamic striker, one of the best players in the league mid-season. I think the quiet loss of Morgan Gautrat as a midfield tempo setter is something that they have quietly missed a little bit more than maybe people realize. They're just not finding the same seams as last year, though they've picked up some nice momentum in the last 5 or 6 weeks of the season. I don't want to discount the way they were able to recover after kind of hitting this 7-game skid. But I also think the defense has been less sturdy. They have fewer answers for pace and just fewer ideas as a collective unit this year. And Seattle, for all of their conservative tactics, have become more off-ball sort of mentality monsters throughout the course of this season, playing in a damn Christmas tree formation. They themselves don't generate a lot of attack, but they also do a good job of mitigating their opponent's ideas. And in my experience watching a team play that way, there are other instances of teams playing a similar style going far in the NWSL playoffs, because this kind of anti-soccer, this negative tactics, it's sometimes the best way to advance in a winner-take-all knockout soccer scenario. You see it on the international stage a lot, less in the club game, but I think that it is kind of set up for playoffs. And I think also the Reign have been to the playoffs so many times. Laura Harvey has been to the playoffs so many times. They got Jess Fishtalk, Lou Barnes. These players have this experience and they're trying something different. And I really think it might work. They tied Orlando just last week in a tight 1-1 stalemate. And through context clues, it seems like they were happy with the way the Chat GPT 5-back worked against Orlando early in this season, despite the fact they lost 1-0. So I don't know. Is it spicy to say that Orlando hasn't looked quite like their former selves? Maybe, maybe not. But I guess I'd be more surprised at this point to see Seattle wilt after figuring out a very distinct shape all season. But really what I'm hoping for in terms of what I would consider to be a good game would be for Orlando to unlock that pretty early and force Seattle to come out of their shell a little bit more and actually play for this game. I think best case scenario for the neutral viewer is someone like Marta comes in like a wrecking ball, knocks the Christmas tree over, and then Seattle has to try a plan B. I think that is the best case scenario for this quarterfinal. Though, again, Chat GPT ball, we were joking about it, when they were playing Orlando over the weekend and then they score the equalizer and we go, okay, the computer got one. We'll see if it gets another one. I would like for this one to hopefully be a little bit more dynamic, though, than I think the tactical setup is going to be. Number 3, speaking of tactical setups, I think it's going to take a late goal for the Spirit to be able to beat Louisville. Louisville, everyone knows, is the great success story of the 2025 regular season. They made the playoffs for the first time in club history after, I think, 5 consecutive seasons of finishing 9th, 4 consecutive seasons of finishing 9th. Congratulations to Racing Louisville. I think the world of Bev Yanez and what she's doing with that project down there. And I think they're going to make things really hard on the Spirit. I don't know if I'm opting for the upset here, but I think it's going to be very difficult. And I think it's going to take possibly all game for the Spirit to find their breakthrough. Louisville has found their success in a very kind of route one game plan. They play very physically. They make things very hard on you. They're relentless in their defensive press. I don't know exactly where Louisville's offense comes from this one. Set pieces, probably aerial duels, winning tactics, trying to turn the tide of possession very, very quickly. They're going to run down the throats of an already ailing Washington Spirit team with gusto. This is like Taylor Flynn's time to shine. They're going to try to have Emma Sears put on the Jets from the wing, maybe open things up for her teammates, maybe take it herself, whatever you can grab. This is going to feel, the way Louisville was going to play this playoff game is going to feel like those teams, those like bruiser teams, maybe of like 2017, 2018, and then 2021 was a year where you saw a lot of success with players kind of playing that sort of, again, mentality off ball, turn things around, play very physically, and knock off a team that maybe player for player has the talent advantage. And the Spirit's injury report was genuinely concerning last week, some of which I think was hopefully possibly rest for the playoffs, but still feels bad after all the struggles they had to get healthy both last year and this year. They just can't kick the injury bug. It was a huge point of conversation going into their championship appearance last season. Similar now, you have Trinity Rodman out, Croy Bethune, Gift Monday, Lacey Santos, Rose Kawasi all missed Sunday's game. It was a very long injury report. District Press, who does a lot of nice local Spirit coverage down in DC, did have a photographer in practice on Tuesday. Rodman is in a leg sleeve. They note that Croy Bethune was training, but maybe separate from the group. Give Monday was not there on Tuesday, and that Kawasi and Santos were in full training. So hopefully they'll have some of those players back. I fear they're not going to have all of those players back, which would just be a shame. I mean, we said from the very beginning of the season, if the Spirit can just become their full selves, who can stop them? And I'm still not sure we're going to get that this postseason as much as I would like to see it. I would love to see Rodman return, but I know they're not going to rush her back. She's too important to the game at large. However, Washington is very good at gutting games out. They have the talent advantage here, as I said, and they do still know how to get that last minute equalizer, how to get that last minute game winning goal. They're very good at playing for the full 90 minutes, at least late. I think if they're going to be in danger of letting one slip, it's going to be in the first half. I think that once they tighten up in the second half, they're going to be able to make those adjustments and and kind of divert around perhaps Louisville's, again, more straightforward game plan. But I think Louisville's going to make this one hard. I think there's like, all guts, all glory type mentality for what Louisville has been able to do. And as long as they're able to maintain control and stay focused and not let the moment get away from them, I think this one's going to go down to the wire. Again, I believe in the spirit. I wonder if this is like an OT situation, an extra time situation, but I think Louisville's going to give it all they got. And I think where Washington is right now in terms of fitness is not exactly where they would like to be playing a team as physical as Louisville. And then going to number 4, this is actually probably my boldest prediction. I think I hedged a bit on the Kansas City one so people understand kind of where I'm coming from, as much as I think Kansas City is probably going to make it to the final this year as good as they've been. This is perhaps my boldest one because it's kind of a dark horse flyer, though it shouldn't be. This team is in 3rd. Call me crazy, but I think Portland could be playing for a championship at the end of November. I like the way they've been playing. I think they're coming off a really nice amount of momentum with some of their international players. They were quietly one of the more impressive teams in the second half of the season. I think them finishing where they did was a surprise to everybody. They had, the Rob Gale era. I think people are still trying to figure out how real that is or what he's learning as a coach on the job while kind of playing games in real time. We've seen some tactical blunders, but we've also seen some very big, impressive wins. And I've said this up and down on this podcast all year. I think the world of the season that Sam Coffey is having, I think the world of the season that Olivia Moultrie is having, Pietra Torden has been very good for them up top. And depending on how the rest of the above, like my top 3 points go, I think they're going to look very comfortable in the postseason. And they're playing a San Diego team in their quarterfinal that has done really well for where they started the season. But I think it's been a little bit more up and down in terms of results since returning from the break. They were 4-3-3 before the big long summer international break. They're 3-6-4 after the break. So they've taken quite a few losses since coming back in August. I think they're going to need, if San Diego is going to have a chance in this one, I think they're going to need a little bit more from some of those season overall best 11 candidates like Kenza Dali or Delphine Cascarino. I also think their defensive core is very young. They field a lot of really young players, which can be an asset perhaps in fearlessness, but also can be something that a more experienced team can exploit. You just sense more tactical frustration despite the bright spots for San Diego. And so I just think in terms of momentum, Portland has this one, and they're going to be at home. And as we know, they play really well at home, and Providence Park is kind of their fortress. And I also just think this is a bigger picture thing, and it's more vibes than anything else. But Portland has been a team that struggles with plateauing. They are a team that, going back to the Mark Parsons years, was known as a team that they play really, really well, and they kind of coast in the last third of the regular season, and they don't always have the most momentum going into the postseason. 2022 notwithstanding, and then after 2022, kind of a similar thing where they make the playoffs, but they don't look like the best team. Maybe they lose in the quarterfinals because they don't mentally believe that they're going to be back there in the championship game. And I think that this team is a little bit stronger than that this year. Their defense has looked sturdier in the second half of the season. Losing Hina Sagita after that trade to Angel City is a blow. One that I don't 100% understand. She's such an asset in postseason ball, but it's true that Eme Vignola has been getting some reps. I do think that their defense looks better. And I believe in that midfield. And just so long as Gale, who is actually probably my biggest question mark for Portland going into the postseason, gets his combinations right, his rotations right, and lets players play to the best of their ability, I think Portland could be the dark horse here. If there is anyone, dark horse sitting in the top 4, but that's kind of the way this season has gone. I think we could see like a Kansas City Portland final, or we could see the fact that they're a little bit healthier than some of the other teams going in, or the fact that they might have, again, those combinations or a system that works for them that's a little bit sturdier than some other teams that have to rely perhaps more on individual brilliance. I don't know. I like the Thorns. I like what I've seen from them. I've wanted them to be more consistent than they have been this year. Maybe this is me wishing that on them for the postseason. But I think if Gale can get this right, this is a team to watch as well. So all of those could come true. None of those could come true. I firmly believe they're all possible. And I cannot wait to see what happens with the quarterfinals this weekend. I love the NWSL playoffs. And I've been a little bit critical of this year's NWSL regular season. It's felt like it's been hard to kind of grab onto the storyline. So this is why the postseason is so important, because this is where it's going to be all storyline, all gas, no breaks, all the way until San Jose at the end of November. I hope everyone tunes in, and we will definitely talk about what happened next week. The Late Sub is part of the Just Women Sports Network. This show is written by Claire Watkins and produced and edited by Parker Fenton. To get more of your favorite women's sports content, subscribe to the Just Women Sports newsletter and follow Just Women Sports across all your favorite channels.